Hello humans and welcome to another episode of Chef Mike Does Stuff. I of course am Chef Mike because it says so right here on my chef coat. Now, first of all, thank you to Team 17 and the folks at Epic Chef for sponsoring this video. But most importantly, today is not only a two-parter, we're going to do two recipes today, but I have been hired as the culinary ambassador to Ambrosia. And I'm going to try to say it awesome like that every time. But in Ambrosia, it's a beautiful land full of culinary delights, interesting ingredients, culinary competitions. I highly recommend you go and visit because it's a beautiful, magical land. And the townsfolk are somewhat welcoming, so should be very exciting. Now, as we go through these recipes, I am going to be using ingredients from Ambrosia. But if you do not have those ingredients, I will do my best to offer up replacements that might be easier to find in your location. So the first recipe we're going to do today is a unicorn fillet on top of an ethereal potato cake with some asparagus, oven-dried tomatoes, and a unicorn pan reduction sauce. Now, like I said, if you cannot find some of those ingredients, I'll talk through what you can use to replace it, but I highly recommend trying to get it as true and as authentic to Ambrosia as you can. So let's go ahead and get started so that you can learn how to make your own tasty, delicious, fancy plated food items that you may or may not need to use in some type of culinary competition. The first step is to take your ethereal potatoes, and we're going to boil those for about 6 to 7 minutes. We're going to start off in cold water, turn the heat on high. If you don't have ethereal potatoes, you're going to want something that's a little more like starchy and fluffy, so probably buy you more of a russet. And we're only going to boil these for about 6 or 7 minutes, so they're still going to be a little bit crunchy because we are going to turn this into our ethereal potato cake. We're going to fry it later. So just cook it till it's like not fork tender. You don't even want to be able to like jab a fork through it clean. You're going to want to feel a little resistance and not even as much as like a potato salad. So in 6 or 7 minutes, I'm going to take this off and I'm going to cool them down. You could totally do this the day before. Next, we're going to get our oven-dried tomatoes in the oven. So I've got some cherry tomatoes here. You just simply cut them in half. I already did a couple, like so. Going to give it just a pinch of salt. We're going to give it a pinch of black pepper and just a little bit of olive oil. Like so, not much at all. Your oven should be set to about 300 degrees, which isn't super high, but that's perfect because we want these tomatoes to not be like chewy and overly dried. So we want these to be, they're going to be shriveled up. They're going to look like they're, oven dried or sun dried tomatoes, but they are going to be a little more juicy than normal. I don't want them to get stuck in your teeth or anything like that, but these will be a delicious accompaniment to our unicorn fillet. I like to put them on a lined pan just like this, the open side up, because we really want to remove that moisture, and that'll give us a good indication of when they're done. And that's all you got to do. So we'll put this in the oven. It'll probably take 40 minutes or so because we want these dried out, but we don't want these too dark or too brown or too burnt. So there you go. Next, we're going to take our unicorn fillets. Like I said, if you can't find unicorn, beef would be a great alternative for that. We're simply going to just hit it with a little salt and pepper. And by little, I mean moderate. This is going to be, these are big hunks of meat. So you could go ahead and season it to your taste or your guests' tastes. Okay. Flip them over so that way they're both seasoned. Now, the other thing we are going to do right now is we're going to put this back in the fridge until we're ready. It'll probably sit in the fridge for 30 to 45 minutes. We're basically kind of dry brining this. So either if you're cooking a steak, I recommend either you season it right away and start cooking, or season it ahead of time and let it sit for at least a half hour to 45 minutes to we want this salt to kind of absorb into the meat so that it'll be nice and seasoned throughout. So just put this back in the fridge for a little bit. Next up, we are going to blanch our asparagus in salted boiling water. So as you can see here, I actually trimmed them down a little bit. Think about how big your unicorn fillet is. Think about how big your ethereal potato cake is going to be, because we're going to stack those on top of each other. So I did cut them down all to about the same size length. We're going to put this in the salted boiling water, and we're only going to cook it for about like 2 minutes, maybe even a minute. And after that, we're going to put it in iced water. We're going to shock it. It's going to make it nice and vibrant green. It's going to give it a much better texture when we just do a quick saute on it before we serve it to our guests. So in 1 to 2 minutes, take this out and put it in salted water. Next up is our ethereal potato. So with an old-timey box grater or whatever you got, I already did a couple. You could go ahead and grate them. Now, you'll notice that it's pretty soft, but you still hear a little like because it's not 100% cooked all the way. We're also doing this in a little basket of paper towels because moisture is the enemy of crispiness. So not too hard, but we're going to dry this off. So that way when we make our potato cake, there's a lot less moisture. All our potatoes are grated and dried. So what we're going to do now is add a bunch of salt, a hefty pinch, but remember we're going to have sauce on our plate, so it doesn't have to go overboard with the seasoning, but we do want everything to be seasoned. Some black pepper. I like to add just a little bit of smoked paprika, gives it a nice, obviously smoky flavor. This is 2 green onions, sliced nice and thin, and 1 clove of garlic because garlic is delicious. And we totally just toss and mix these together. Now I did use two potatoes. Probably could have got away with just 1 because right now I'm actually just going to make 2 of the unicorn fillets because my significant other would like to eat as well. But we're getting this ready. We're going to form these and fry these. We're just going to form them in our hand and fry them in a pan in a little bit. But now is the time where we have just about everything ready. My tomatoes are out. My asparagus is ready to saute. Steak has been seasoned. So we're going to go ahead and deal with the steak now. And then we'll finish cooking the potatoes. And we'll be ready to plate. Sorry for the noise, but when you do this, because we are searing something in a pan, make sure you have your fans on and vents so we don't get too much smoke in your kitchen. I've got a little bit of avocado oil. Use whatever high heat oil you've got. Vegetable oil, canola oil. I've got avocado, grapeseed oil, something like that. We've got our steaks. They were in the fridge for about 40-50 minutes. Take a paper towel and just dab it. Like if you had pizza with a little extra grease, you don't want to wipe it, just enough to absorb some of the moisture that was settling on the steak. Our pan is hot and ready to go. Like so. Okay. Now, the rarer you like the steak, the hotter your pan can be. Because you want to just brown the outside and keep that inside at your desired temperature. We have to remember we're also going to try to make a pan sauce in this same pan. So we don't want to burn anything that's going to be on the bottom. We also want to leave in the pan any of the brown that gets stuck on the bottom while our steak is cooking. So we're going to let this go for we're going to try to shoot for like a medium rare, medium-ish, somewhere in there. We'll probably cook it 3 to 4 minutes per side. So we'll be right back when that's ready to rock. Our steak is ready to rock. See, nice and browned on both sides. It's done to about a medium rare medium. I've already turned it off, but you could see that there's stuff left in the pan. Beautiful, because we are going to make a pan sauce in that in just a minute. There is little crunchy bits on the bottom. Fantastic. Leave those in. We've got some minced shallot. There's going to be a little bit of oil left in the bottom of the pan, but move these shallots around. You can use a wooden spoon and really scrape off the little bits on the bottom because that's all delicious flavor that's going in our pan sauce. Like so. 1 clove of garlic. And don't worry if you can't get it all off right now because we are going to deglaze the pan with wine. Okay. I'm going to add a little shot of tomato paste. This will help with our sauce, and it's okay if it like browns up. Get it all in there, maybe just a touch more. You can see that a lot of those crispy bits where I seared the steak have little marks on it. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to add a pinch of salt now. Right in the pan. Pinch of pepper, just like that into the pan. Now I'm going to add a shot of red wine. And that will absolutely deglaze the pan. Everything that was stuck on the bottom's coming out. Perfect. Just like so. Now I'm going to add unicorn stock. And this is where we are just about ready with our pan sauce. I am going to throw a sprig of thyme in there. You could turn the heat down to kind of medium-low. Look at that. You could tell the consistency is just about where we want it. It is that quick. And this is just enough to cover our 2 awesome unicorn fillets. That's it. Turn it off because there's going to be a lot of residual heat here. If it's too runny, if it's too, cook it longer. If it's too thick for you, maybe add some more beef broth to it. This looks great. So the last thing I'm going to do is turn the heat off. And I'm going to add 1 little pat of butter. Heat's off. We're just going to slowly melt that in. It's going to make this sauce nice and shiny, nice and tasty. We're going to just finish heating up our asparagus. We're going to fry up our ethereal potato cake. And then it is going to be time for the best part. Remember to remove the sprig of thyme. All right, we're ready for our ethereal potato cakes. I just formed them in the palm of my hand, about the size of the unicorn fillet that we're using. I've got some hot olive oil here. Be very careful when you add these so they do not fall apart and you do not burn yourself. They are very delicate. You could add like egg and other things to this to hold it together, but I did not want to do that. I think it holds together just fine as is. So we're going to fry these up until they're a beautiful golden brown. The last thing we're going to do, as you can see, there's just a touch of olive oil in this pan. Let's take your asparagus. I know you shock them in ice water, but make sure they're pretty dry. Throw them into the pan. We're basically just heating these up and seasoning, just a little salt and pepper, not too much. We've got a sauce that is accompanying this, like so. Just like that, and just heat thoroughly. Just there's going to be maybe a touch of brown on it, and that's it. And then, when this is done, it is time for the fun part, which is plating it up all fancy. Now is the exciting part on plating the fancy dish. Now, you could do it however you want. I'm just giving you an option. So the first thing I'm going to do on this fancy plate, and this plate has some cool design on it, depending on what kind of plate you have. You do what you want. I'm going to put our ethereal potato cake a little off center, because I'm going to have the asparagus tips are facing that way, and when the guests eat, they're going to be looking at this way, so it'll be presented super fancy and professional. Now, since I'm eating this, I'm using my hands. Obviously, if you are cooking for guests, you may want to use some gloves. But do what you want to do. Be food safe however you can. You see, I'm letting the tips hang out just a tiny bit. Could be kind of random. Doesn't need to be a super straight line. So there's our portion. And this part's kind of going to be hidden by steak, by our unicorn. So you don't have to worry if those ends are not perfectly lined up. Like so. It's already looking awesome. We've got our filet here. Like so. Now, I'm going to do the sauce next and then the tomatoes because I don't want the sauce to drizzle over the tomatoes. Here we go. Oh, yeah. Okay, and if you need to do a little help, have it start cascading down a little bit like so. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of the onions, the garlic, and all that fun stuff. So you can let that do its thing. I want it to pour down a little bit. Let's get just a little bit more. Okay. Like so. And you could see that I'm actually dragging it to kind of pool off to the side. And finally, our oven-dried tomatoes, which are going to look pretty magical. I might do like 5, because that, I think, would look 3, 4, 5. And there you have it. A super fancy, exciting, tasty, upscale unicorn fillet with ethereal potato cake, asparagus, oven-dried tomatoes, and a delicious unicorn pan sauce. I am super excited to eat some unicorn, but we're going to take a break as I eat this, and we'll get ready for the next recipe. Hello humans, we are back for part 2 of this delicious, tasty episode. Now, as you may or may not know, it is always very important to understand who you are cooking for, who your guests are, or who your judges are, because they have a variety of personal taste preferences. So the next dish we're going to do is actually a full vegan soup. It is a caramelized onion and strong cider soup with a little garnish of pan-seared mushroom in the middle. Now, for anyone who loves them some meat, I am not vegan, however, I do love vegan food. There is so much umami going on in this dish, and umami is that meaty taste. It doesn't have to be from meat, but there's enough umami in this dish that those of you who love meat will still love this dish. Couple other call outs are the fact that the mushrooms that I sourced and I found are not exactly the ones from Ambrosia, as those are blue. So if you could find those, highly recommend you use those because they are the most flavorful. But I have some replacements that'll look a little bit different. But let's go ahead and get started so you can make your own tasty, delicious vegan soup. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is add a bunch of onions to this pot. There's just a little bit of olive oil. I'm going to add all of these onions. Like so. Nice and hot pan. Break up all the bigger pieces of onions. If onions fall out of the pot, which they probably will, just put them back in. At this point, you could turn it to medium. And we're going to let this cook for a little bit and get nice and brown. So this whole time, we're going to be looking in this pot for a little while. We're going to be caramelizing these onions for probably an hour. All I'm going to do is add a little bit of salt to it right now. Okay, and this salt is acting more as a function. We're trying to take moisture out. We want all the moisture out of these onions for them to start browning. And then I'm going to turn it down to medium, and I'm probably going to cook it for, like I said, 45 minutes to an hour. All right, so our onions have been going for about 45 minutes now. You can see it's starting to brown, nice and reduced. That big pot of onions has cooked down into this little bit. So now we're going to add some more of our veg. In here, I've got 1 potato, which I'll explain in a minute. So 1 small peeled potato, 1 carrot, 1 stalk of celery, and 4 cloves of garlic into the pot to soften and all that fun stuff. Now, one of the reasons why I'm using this potato is because not only is this recipe vegan, it is also going to be gluten-free. So with normal cream sauce, I might add some flour and butter, cook that down to make a roux, and that is my thickening agent. That is not going on with this dish because butter is, of course, a dairy product and flour would be gluten. So we're adding this potato so when we puree everything, that is going to help us thicken a bunch of stuff up. I'm going to probably keep cooking this for another 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and start adding some liquids to this, maybe some herbs, some more seasonings, and we'll get this soup rocking and rolling. All right, so that is cooked down very nicely, nice and brown. There's stuff stuck to the bottom of the pot, which is great. As you're cooking, make sure you use like a wooden spoon or spatula of some kind, and you could literally scrape the bottom to make sure that nothing on the bottom burns. You want this nice dark brown color of stuff without it burning. But the next fun part is I recommend turning off the fire before you do this. Add a bottle of your favorite hard cider, strong cider, whatever you want to call it, into the pot. Beautiful. And turn it back on. And now you could get it a little more medium. What we're going to do is cook this till everything is nice and soft. It is going to reduce, which is perfectly fine, because we also have vegetable stock we are going to use in this. Now, vegetable stock is very important to have a bunch. It is going to be our kind of buffer and our savior. If, let's say, we puree all this up and it's way too thick, well, we're just going to add vegetable stock. If we cook this up, puree it all up, and it's way too thin, then we don't need to add vegetable stock, but we could just keep cooking it and let it reduce. So that is what we're going to do now. So once it starts rocking and rolling, I'm going to say on medium-high heat at this point, because we want all those vegetables to get nice and soft because we're going to puree it up. Maybe 15 or so minutes, and then we'll be back. So I've been cooking this for about 10 minutes now, and it's already getting a little too reduced. You know, like I said before, I want those vegetables to get soft. but I can already tell I'm going to need more moisture. So you can either add some more stock right now. You can either do what I'm about to do and add some more of your strong cider, whatever you want to do to make sure that this doesn't get too dry, but it keeps cooking for all of the vegetables to get nice and soft so we can puree it. But remember to have extra vegetable stock on hand in the end, so that way, like I said, if it's way too thick, we can fix that. I'm also not seasoning it a lot. I'm going to do that after we puree it, because then I can adjust. We're reducing things and adding things, so once the consistency is where I want it, then we could go ahead and season it appropriately. It's cooked for another, I don't know, half hour or so. All the vegetables are pretty much tender, ready to go. So now it's blend time. I have an immersion blender here. There's a blade on the bottom. I'm going to put it in and blend everything up. If you don't have this, you can use a blender, a food processor, whatever you got to puree this all up, and then put it back into the pot. I do recommend starting on low, so that way you don't blow up, not blow up, but you don't splatter a bunch of food everywhere. So let's blend this up. If you do this and you notice that there are still too many big chunks of vegetables that are not as smooth as you'd like it, you probably need to cook it a little longer. So I would go ahead and keep cooking it after you do this part. Make sure you pick it up and down to get the big hunks of vegetable into the blade area. Here, let me show you, because there's these little cavities here. My hand's in the way. There's these little cavities here. And if the piece is too big, it won't get like sucked in. So you got to kind of lift it up and move it around. Holding on an angle helps too. And like I said before, yes, this is looking pretty thick, but we still need to season it. We still need to add our vegetable broth, and that will get it to the perfect consistency and flavor that we want. If you want to be super extra fancy, what you would do is, after we did this part and made the soup how we wanted it, you could run it through a little fine sieve to get some of the chunkiness out, and it would be a super smooth soup. You could do that. I'm not going to do that. I mean, that's kind of a waste. I guess not really, if that's how you want to present it, but now you could see how smooth this base is. It's certainly pretty thick, so we're going to add a little bit more broth to it, and then we're going to taste it and season it. That looks awesome. Perfect. Nice and smooth, creamy consistency. This would be a part where I might add butter or cream or one of those things. But like I said, we are going dairy-free. And then if this wasn't thick enough, another thing you could do is add flour or a roux or whatever. But we don't need to do that. All right, let's take a look at this consistency here. Oh, look at that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add vegetable broth, just enough to get it to the consistency that I think is awesome, what I'm looking for. This is a nice hearty soup that would be delicious for fall. You got apple, the cider, you got caramelized onion. Let's add just a touch more. Okay, now that I add this, I'm going to bring it back up to a boil just so that everything's mixed and nice, cooked thoroughly, evenly blended. Then I am going to season it, salt and pepper, and we'll be ready to rock. All right, we're going to go ahead and cook our little garnish. So I just got some mushrooms in here. Just a little bit of salt. Just a little bit of pepper. And we're just going to saute these until they're cooked through. Maybe even just a little bit brown. That's going to go in the middle of our bowl. We're going to pour the soup over the sides of it. So we're not going to cover the mushrooms. There's going to be a little pile in there. And then we're going to sprinkle some herbs over the top. And then it's time to eat. All right, it is time to plate. Now, what I'm going to do, obviously, if I'm cooking for myself, so I'm using my hands. If you're cooking for guests or judges, you're probably going to want to use some gloves. But I'm going to stack our sauteed mushrooms kind of right in the middle so that you get some height on it. Okay, like so. Perfect, perfect. Let me wipe my hands down. Now, a way to serve soup tableside is you come in with the soup already in one of these bad boys. Nice and slow. You see? And you see how our garnish is nice and in the middle like so. And then because this is just kind of boring and brown, I'm going to add a couple leaves of fresh thyme. Some people are going to be like, hey, how come you didn't add thyme into the soup? And I'm going to be like, because I want fresh thyme flavor. I don't want cooked thyme flavor. So there. And just like that, you have yourself a delicious caramelized onion and strong cider soup. Just remember, this would look cooler with ambrosias. Blue mushrooms. I could not find any. Shipping the mushrooms from Ambrosia was relatively difficult, so I used baby portobello mushrooms. But here is a delicious soup for those warm nights that you need some tasty soup, I guess. And just like that, your delicious caramelized onion and strong cider soup is done. Like I said before, I would have preferred using the blue mushrooms from Ambrosia. Very difficult to source in my location, so maybe when I go visit next time, I'll get some of those. I want to thank Team 17. I want to thank Epic Chef for sponsoring this video. And of course, I want to thank Ambrosia for making me their culinary representative. Please go visit if you can. It's beautiful land full of amazing ingredients and decent enough people who will certainly help you along, maybe if you need anything. But if you think you are a culinary savant, feel free to challenge some of the locals, and we'll see how you do. It's been a pleasure. See you next time.